So now that we've discussed body alignment, both while standing and sitting, that is how we hold our instruments so that we can play them effectively and efficiently, I want to turn our attention to how we set up and tune our instruments prior to playing them. So in this case, how we prepare our instruments to be able to make the kinds of sounds that we want to make. So the best way to prepare our instruments for being played, now that we're holding them properly, is to learn to be able to take an effective inhale. Not only does a good inhale ensure that we're getting an effective full breath when we need one, and that our instruments, our breath management systems are set up and ready to go to be able to manage our breath effectively on the exhale, but it ensures that our vocal tracts are nicely opened, we'll say. So we've got some release of those pharyngeal constrictor muscles that tend to cause that feeling of tightness and squeeze in our throats. So what we want to do with this inhale is we want to get a little bit of a lift in here, up under the eyes, a lift of the cheeks, these zygomatic muscles in here that lift the corners of the mouth. It's not a full smile, it's just a little lift from here to there. And this kind of happens simultaneously as we draw in our breath. And this is thought to help us get a better lift of the soft palate. Now, of course, there are no real muscular attachments between these zygomatic muscles and the soft palate, but what I am convinced is that it triggers a psychological response in us, that little bit of a smile. When we smile, our bodies change how they respond physiologically, because now there's a little bit of an emotion attached to that inspiration to sing. So we want to get this little lift as we inhale. And that inhale is going to be taken with a very quiet chest. We've already set up the sternum. The sternum's already nice and elevated. The rib cage is open. Our shoulders are in a good place. They're not up here. They've settled down into a nice position. All right, so everything feels open and easy and aligned and balanced. So now that we have good alignment and our sternums are a little elevated and our shoulders are up to the sides and they're not up here, they're nice and released down there. Sometimes it actually helps too if you bring up your shoulders towards your ears and then just let them fall. And that helps us to find a really good feeling of release through here. And now we're set up again, right, for that efficient inhale. Right? I just took a full breath right there, and you could see that my chest is quiet. I'm not lifting up this way. My sternum is already elevated, and I've allowed all the expansion to happen around here in this epigastric region. A little bit forward, right here in the soft part of the stomach, the side ribs, and also the ribs at my back. We're going to do some more exercises in an upcoming module in which we'll work on trying to get a better expansion through here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the breath. But for today, we're going to talk about releasing those pharyngeal constrictor muscles as we inhale. Now we should get a feeling of air rushing in, right? A little bit. I'm smiling because I like to smile. Right? You don't need to smile like I am there, but this feeling of the air rushing in, everything just feels like it kind of swings wide open. That's the sensation that we should have. And every time we take a breath, we need to allow that breath to become our natural recovery. That breath renewal is the time when we reset, when we retune our instruments to be able to sing with that kind of freedom, that feeling of release in the throat, and to be able to make the kinds of sounds that we're hoping to make, resonant, free sounds. So now that we've elevated these zygomatic muscles, these cheeks, a little smile up under the eyes, we want to take in our breath. And we want this feeling of inspiration, almost like, we smell something great, we have a great feeling. Some describe it as sort of having, like you're losing your train of thought, but you're about to say something and you stop yourself short because you forget what you're going to say. This feeling of the air rushing in, cooling the airway, cooling our resonance passages. I can feel that. I can feel that air rushing over the hard palate and cooling the inside of my throat. Now the tongue should just be in a really nice, comfortable, natural, at rest position when the mouth is open. Kind of like an awe position. We don't want to over flatten it. Some singers have been taught to flatten or depress their tongues to try to get a better breath. But in actuality, when they flatten their tongues, they're actually pushing the body of the tongue farther back into the throat. So while they're creating more space in the oral cavity, they're actually losing that space inside the throat. So let the tongue do what it wants to do, but just keep an eye out for any kind of signs of tension or things being a little bit askew, things that might be impeding that airflow. If you hear a really noisy inhale, then that's a sign that there's some sort of obstruction along the way, or partial obstruction of your airways. That sound of turbulent airflow that you're hearing, I'm exaggerating that one, that's really scary actually. That turbulent airflow means that there is too little space somewhere inside your throat or your mouth. It's not allowing the air to come through as freely as it otherwise should. And you can tell a little bit about where that obstruction might be occurring by where you're feeling that cooling sensation. So let's say your tongue is up really, really high. Put your tongue into an E posture and take an inhale. You should be feeling that sense of cooling around your soft palate area, the back part of the hard palate perhaps, and that's because when the tongue is elevated and the air is trying to flow through, there's this pressure maxima that we experience where the air, will say, accumulates, that air pressure accumulates behind the tongue until it's able to finally escape out the mouth. Generally speaking, we want to feel that sense of cooling sort of dispersed throughout the vocal tract. When we feel that, then that means that there's no point at which that airflow is significantly obstructed. Again, if we're feeling it really forward in front of the soft palate, it probably means our tongues are a little too high. If we're mostly feeling it in the back of the throat, that's probably a sign that our tongues are too low. So get that nice, relaxed, comfortable tongue position. Get a little bit of a lift here. For me, assuming that pleasant expression, having that appearance of enthusiasm and joy really triggers the brain. It triggers the brain to coordinate the body in such a way as to encourage the kinds of things that happen when we do feel exhilaration and joy and happiness and excitement about something. So for this week, work on getting that feeling of inspiration inside your throat. Work on that feeling of air just kind of rushing in and all those pharyngeal constrictor muscles releasing. The larynx just naturally descends, the soft palate goes up, the tongue root moves forward so that it's leaning up against the anterior or the front wall of the throat. And we have this sense of openness, a sense of freedom inside our throats. And then we're going to learn to sing on that. But first, start with setting up your instrument and tuning it in preparation for making these kinds of sounds that you want to make, in preparation for playing your instrument. In Module 4, I'm going to be talking about how to get that nice, efficient inhale, how to ensure that the parts of our bodies that are involved in taking in that breath are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're doing it from a balanced position.